I hope you can see it now. Yep, wonderful. Perfect. So I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Beacon, for hosting me for the second time this year. I really cannot be more grateful. So before we get started, I just wanted to set the scene for our journey today for the next 20 minutes or so. First, I want to talk about the trends that the pandemic has brought on. What has the past 12 months taught us about remote working and social distancing? How does that affect the way we work? What does the future of work and the office space look like? And then looking at these two trends, how does this impact our workforce and community moving forward? So that's what I like to talk about today. So let's get started. All right. So first of all, fewer women are working today compared to 1990. Let me say that again in a different way. Compared to 3 decades ago, in the employable women population, fewer women are working today. 2.5 million women have lost their jobs or dropped out of the workforce during the pandemic. Now, February of last year, we had 5 million women who were business owners. As of April last year, 25% had closed their doors. Some people are calling this the she-cession. Compared to other recessions, more women than men have lost their jobs or stopped working in the past year. Vice President Kamala Harris called this exodus a national emergency. What's driving all of this? So, more women are employed in the hospitality and travel industries in low to middle income work. These were the industries that were most severely impacted during the pandemic. From a work function perspective, marketing and communication roles were also more vulnerable to job cuts compared to finance roles, which are dominated by men, typically. Women spend an average of almost 8 hours more a week than men on unpaid childcare last year. Think about that. 8 hours. That's a full workday. So what happened was this forced some women to quit their work in order to cope with additional childcare responsibilities. So this whole year just reversed the progress that we've made in the past in terms of gender equality at work. The World Economic Forum estimated that it will take us 268 years to close this economic gender gap. That is 9 generations to close this economic gap. And that is just, for me, that's just crazy. And then what happens is McKinsey comes around and says, wait a minute, this is going to get worse. McKinsey estimated that more than 1 in 4 women are thinking of taking a step back in their careers or leaving the workforce completely. Already, we know we have a broken rung problem in leadership. Only 85 women are promoted as first-time managers for every 100 men. And now what they found out in their research is that senior level women are 1.5 times more likely than senior level men to think about downshifting their role or leaving the workforce because of COVID-19. And this is because most of them, about 3/4, are citing burnout for leaving the workforce. Right now, we're emerging from the pandemic. More people are getting vaccinated, and so companies now are trying to figure out what the future office space will look like. We have a majority of employees, about 58%, who prefer to spend more time working remotely. That's around 3 to 5 days a week from home. Compared to employers, about 68% think that employees should be on site and in the office around 3 to 5 days per week. So that might be a little bit of a disconnect here. And companies have come up with a wide range of responses. We have companies such as Dropbox, Slack, Square, and Twitter who state very early on and from the start, their teams can work 100% remotely forever. And then we have other companies that have come up with a hybrid response. Facebook at the start also said you can work from wherever forever. But they've recently backpedaled and said, no, we expect 50% of people will actually go back to the office. HubSpot said they expect their teams to be in office 2-3 days a week. And then we have other companies such as Google, Microsoft, Salesforce. They said, team's choice. You pick, you figure out within amongst yourselves. So we have a whole range of responses here that different companies are talking about now. Yet, there are some employers who think that employees should be mainly in the office. These are companies such as Goldman and JP Morgan. In fact, Jamie Dimon just yesterday said that there's no substitute for being in the office. He said that they lost clients to rivals last year because their rivals went and visited their clients. Here is why some people may choose to actually return to the office full time. Particularly for single people, the past year has been very lonely. Some miss the social aspect of being in the office with others. 2, innovation and collaboration is just not quite the same, even with the technology that we have today. Brainstorming is harder unless you start using tools such as Miro to imitate the whiteboard style that we have in person. And you just can't replicate water cooler conversations on Zoom. Culture is not scalable in the virtual world. Mentorship and relationship development between managers and team members is just not the same. And then Andrew Yang, he's also suggested that we need incentives and tax breaks to bring people back into the office, because having people back in the city is good for the local economy. Think about local services that serve people in Midtown. We have lunch spots and gyms and dry cleaners. Now, all these businesses have been affected in the past year, and he wants to bring that back into Midtown. Now we're going to go into a quick poll. I think this has been set up, yes? What do you think the future workplace look like? Do you think it will be 100% on-site, hybrid, or exclusively in the office? Great. Yeah, that's probably going to be it. That's what I think too. Right. So, what is the impact? Hybrid work. Now we know from the past and also from this pandemic, women are more likely than men to work from home. Whether it's the ability to do laundry at lunchtime, to spend a bit more time with children at home, women with children in particular are probably more likely to opt for remote work. And I think the option to work remotely, this hybrid arrangement, is fantastic, and we should celebrate it because this increases flexibility. It opens up access for women who may not otherwise work because of their home responsibilities. It also helps to bring more women into leadership positions because they might actually stop work early because they want to care for younger children. So by providing this flexibility, I think businesses can be more inclusive. And of course, with the minimized commute, I think for everyone, this flexibility increases work-life balance. But there's always a flip side. I think with distributed teams, there is also a risk. It becomes more difficult to develop connections with the entire team. Now, as a manager, if you're coming into the office, you're more likely to bond with employees who are more visible, so people who you see. And what is the impact then on performance reviews? I'm going to come back to that a bit later in the presentation, but just have that thought in mind. More visibility could lead to allocation of interesting work or cool projects to the people that you see, people that you're familiar with, and maybe you have coffee in person on a daily basis, people that you work with previously. So to a certain extent, if you're out of sight, you're out of mind for these interesting and cool projects. What this means is that this could impact salary increases and promotions in the long run. This reinforces salary disparity between the genders. Before the whole pandemic, Nicholas Bloom, he is an econs professor. He's an economics professor at Stanford. He ran a study. And he found that remote workers had 50% lower rate of promotion after just 21 months compared to their coworkers who went to the office. one more thing that is coming our way, the fourth industrial revolution. Automation will complete many tasks that once required human beings, changing how jobs will look like in the future. Repeatable and predictable tasks, clerical, administrative roles, mainly held by women, a lot of these tasks will be completed faster and more effectively by machines. So McKinsey estimates that the demand for such skills and roles will decline by around 30% within the next 10 years. So we need both upskilling and reskilling in order that we don't lose more women in the workforce. But 25% of executives don't actually know how to quantify the business case to reskill their workforce. What is the return on investment? And then another third says, well, our current HR structure is not equipped to execute on this strategy to reskill our workforce. So one easy way would be to just go out and hire staff with the right skills. But this leaves a group of our workforce at risk. They would be unemployed. There is another possibility. Businesses may be pressured to do differently. And this is because recently, the World Economic Forum put together stakeholder capitalism metrics, and they consulted accounting firms, companies, and investors to come up with 21 different metrics. So for instance, companies in the future may be expected to report on board composition from gender and social perspective, greenhouse gas emissions, gender pay gap, diversity, how much training is provided by gender, that is how many hours and how much you invest into training by gender, the number of jobs the companies create, and also how much you invest in your local community. So that could be money, that could be services, and that could be hours. With these metrics, I am of two minds about it. I think on the one hand, it is good that there's a set of measurements that the industry seems to agree on moving forward. Because for a while, companies had their own way of reporting sustainability, different companies had their own CSR reports. And so this consistent reporting kind of nudges companies in a similar direction. But on the other hand, I think this comprehensive tracking of ESG metrics can be very overwhelming and costly, particularly if this becomes mandatory, as the World Economic Forum is trying to do. If this becomes mandatory in standard financial reporting, think about the changes we have to put into systems and processes. This will require a lot of investment and could take up a lot more time and resources on the from the company's point of view. I will return to this in a couple of slides. Have a think about the impact of these metrics, and we'll discuss this in a couple of slides. Safe to say for now, I think these ESG metrics is gaining momentum. It's gaining momentum with investors, consumers, employees. All of these stakeholders are demanding for transparency. Now, it might not be possible to actually report on all these dimensions. For one, the existence of this data might not be ready yet. It might not be there. The data might not be clean. But I think when it's possible, companies should start to publish when the data is available. Be honest. If there are gaps, be transparent about the gaps. And then with these gaps, also state, this is what we are doing to try and close these gaps. And I'll give an example why. Now, I'm suggesting it's good to publish metrics even when the situation doesn't look good. We know metrics, they're just a snapshot. They're just a snapshot in time. In my book, The Altruistic Capitalist, I wrote about Unilever and Paul Polman. He worked with Oxfam to do an audit about their supply chain in Vietnam. This was a few years ago. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this story. Now, their report exposed really, really embarrassing gaps in their supply chain. But what it did was it actually brought Unilever closer to their supply chain, to their suppliers, to close some of these gaps, to make these suppliers become more sustainable. So that when Oxfam repeated the audit a few years later, they found that some of these gaps had actually closed. There were still gaps, but they had closed. And in this process, Unilever actually gained trust from their consumer, employee, and supplier community. It also increased transparency because of this increased transparency. I think it also increased the brand equity and the brand value in the eyes of their consumers and their investors. And so if you look at the growth of their sustainable living brands, so these are brands such as Dove and Ben and Jerry's that is under the Unilever umbrella. These are brands that put sustainability and profits give these the equal importance. These brands actually grew 69% faster than the rest of the brands under the Unilever portfolio. So I'm just going to leave you with that statistic. And now we're going to do a quick question. Let's go into the chat and chime in. Like, what do you think what's the impact of this ESG metrics? Can I see chats? Maybe Laurie or Zoe, you can help me. Chime in, or people can speak up.
There's a comment from David Howe. It pushes organizations to put effort behind these issues. From Leslie, it's important to understand the company's values in a holistic way. From Lori, identifying gaps and better balance across many different groups.
Any thoughts from? Good question too.
I think sometimes also, rather than typing it, sometimes we're so confident we understand what it is, and we really have no clue because we only get one perspective that we're looking from. And so, you know, the old story about the elephant, if you touch 3 different parts, you describe very different situations.
Anyone has concerns about these ESG metrics? Because I'm not sure how many have actually seen them. They're quite numerous, and they range from, like I said, diversity all the way to governance. So they even talk about how much tax companies are paying to their local markets.
I have a concern in the nonprofit sector. We're expected to abide by an overhead cap. You know, how much money we spend on overhead, and I find that's a nonsense number because in my view, overhead is body and seat, salary, rent, overhead. But what nonprofits have started to do, because they all want to fit within the guidelines, is say, oh, that person works on programming 80% of their time. So that's not an overhead expense, that's a programming expense. And so we end up looking at a sheet that's very misleading. And while I think the motive behind these ESG metrics are good, I fear that they're going to end up painting a picture that isn't really reality.
Good point. I agree with that. I think there is a tendency that people will try and circumvent the intention behind the metrics to game the system. So that is one thought that I had as well. Thank you, Darren.
And Morris brought up the question of, does it really drive change, or is it more of a marketing tactic for these companies?
I think that's always a good question. How much of it is greenwashing? I think with social media, especially with employees being quite vocal as well, it is hard to hide behind. It's quite hard to hide behind just pure marketing. I think employees now will speak up, and so you could just can't hide behind the talk anymore. So that's my perspective on that.
That suggests you can tell how serious people are based on whether that function reports into marketing or into operations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Good. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Really good to hear all the thoughts behind this. I'm going to move on. This is going to be my last section of the presentation today. This is some of my ideas as to what we can do moving forward. So if ESG reporting becomes a norm, we need to build better businesses. And to build better businesses, we need to start with a shared purpose. Now, shared purpose and common values need to be articulated, repeated, and communicated. I did an interview with Bill Simpson. He was the CEO of Hershey Entertainment, and he used this tactic to increase growth within his team that is distributed across the locations and functions of the Hershey Entertainment Group. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this exercise. He asked why 5 times. Why is it that they want to grow the business? And each time they got a little bit closer to their purpose. At the final why, they said, we want to support the Hershey School. This was their purpose. For those of you who don't know, the Hershey School, founded during Milton Hershey's time, it's a free school for marginalized youth. He wanted to help the children in the community, and so this school was established a long time ago. Now back to Bill. When he got his team to understand what their purpose was, he used this to develop goals and targets in order to grow the business. These goals and these targets help the team to focus and to see and relate back to the impact of what they were doing. They understood that what they were doing then was related back to their purpose, and that purpose was to fund the Hershey School and help the students of that school. And so this was a motivation, and it helped them actually smash through the targets that Bill had set down for them. Another story I have from the book. I also spoke to Ayanna Howard. She is a founder of Zyrobotics, and Zyrobotics uses artificial intelligence to build educational toys for children with disabilities. Now, Ayanna had a conflict that is quite common and quite known and quite familiar to many entrepreneurs. She met with a potential investor who said, why don't you pivot? I want you to pivot to the mass market, which is, of course, completely different from her purpose because she wanted to help children with learning disabilities. So because she was so clear with her purpose of wanting to help these children, she said no. And she was able then later to connect with other investors who cared about the impact she was creating and aligned with her vision. Another thing that comes up quite consistently in my research is business leaders, when they do good, they act with intention and mindfulness. To create a positive impact with customers, investors, and employees, they are very empathetic. And that means that there's no one size that fits all for the entire team. Act authentically. Act accordingly to each person. For some, the shift to remote work has impacted their mental well-being. Employee mental well-being has declined due to isolation and feeling excluded from conversations and decisions during the pandemic. So if some employees are going to be remote and others in the office, make sure that the same communication and messaging is shared with everyone. So something as simple as a check-in every now and again helps employees to feel trusted and valued. Second, listen to the data. Observe how different employees are responding to the hybrid work environment and how teams are performing. Speak often, and so that you can gather the insights, and make any adjustments to make sure that the hybrid work environment is equitable. 3, after you gather the data, shift culture, incentives, and processes accordingly. So if everyday meetings, for example, will be a mixture of online and offline, good digital facilitation is key to ensure that everyone's opinion is sought and heard out. If some decisions are being made in the hallways and conversations are taking place informally, remember to document these conversations and this decision somewhere so that everyone, regardless of where they are, whether they're in the office or online, make sure that everyone has access to the same information, are on the same page. I think the mindset moving forward should be remote first. So how to be inclusive of people who are not in the office when we are in a hybrid office environment. If there is even a chance that employees feel that there's inequity in the way employees who are present in the office versus people who are remote, I think this will create two classes of employees that will result in resentment and dissatisfaction within the teams. A couple more slides before I end. I want to share a couple of ideas. I think one area that we will need to change is performance reviews. Pre-pandemic, 64% of managers believe that employees working in the office are higher performers than remote workers. And these same managers said that they're more likely to give in-office workers a higher raise than remote workers. And I don't know if you heard of this. Something that happened during the pandemic, 20% of companies passively track employees while they're working remotely. When are they actually at their computers and logged on? I don't think that this will work in a hybrid work environment. We need a mindset shift. We can't be clocking in and clocking out like we're working in a factory, for instance. We're not in that kind of economy. You can't give the employee the benefit of a hybrid workplace and then punish the person for taking that benefit. So we need to shift towards monitoring results and behavior and not how many hours a person has clocked. Focus on how we evaluate what value employees bring into the table. So maybe things like collaboration, creativity. How do we measure that? I think that is some of the criteria that will be important to managers in the future. Last slide, and a couple more ideas before I go. I think in the business of doing good, we are in the business of relationships. Ask questions, be curious about who you're working with, and build relationships. Look for ways to improve collaboration and engagement. This can help create growth and opportunities for the business. Our business context is shifting, so we need to shift the way we work accordingly. In terms of distributing projects, how can we make this be more transparent and equitable? Is this a platform where projects, roles, and skills are published? So then I can apply for a project if I think my skills are matched to that. I think the most important thing is to have a lot of things documented so that everyone has access to the same knowledge. And if you take anything from today, we are at a pivot point. Many things are shifting at the moment, whether it's caused by the pandemic or the fourth industrial revolution. This is an opportunity to do things differently and to stand out from the rest. So be relationship driven, because getting this relationship right is good for business. Thank you. And that's me.
Thanks, Lynn. I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions for you. I don't see any in the chat, but if you have one, you want to unmute yourself, feel free to ask it.
Or comments,
Or comments, sure.
I did have a question, though, to Lynn, the other Lynn, our speaker. Has there been a cost analysis done for implementing ESG metrics within companies?
I am not aware of that. I can get back to you on that as to how it is. You're thinking in particular of the stakeholder capitalism matrix that the World Economic Forum
Well,
has.
I was sometimes, companies need to have it, like, be incentivized to do the right thing, so to
Mhm.
speak. And if there's a high cost involved in this environmental, social, or governance engagement, I just had wondered whether there was any data on that, what the what the incentives really are economically for the, it's nice to have a moral code and do the right thing, but they still have to make a profit in terms of the companies. So
Yes,
I was just curious on that.
I have not seen any reports relating to a cost analysis. The World Economic Forum is actually talking to international accounting standards to embed these metrics into financial statements. So it's not really a choice or to motivate. People will just have to do it. And that's kind of why I mentioned it earlier. It could be very costly and quite difficult for smaller businesses, for instance, to do this. Think about the number of systems that need to be put in place in order to track some of these numbers and to put the data. So, yeah.
I think that Rich put in the chat a great point that 75% of the global workforce will be millennials by 2030, and they care. I was talking to somebody who went to a conference at Oxford, and they said, if you're not focused on social impact and doing the right things by 2030, you'll be out of business. So it's not really as much a choice anymore as to should you or shouldn't you, but what happens if you don't.
And also Gen Z that's coming up right now. So I do leadership and mentoring programs for high school kids, and this generation as well. They are so much more conscious and aware of it, and not just sustainability from an environmental perspective. A lot of them are saying, wait, well, what about all this inequality, both gender and racial inequality? They're much more aware than I ever was at that age. So I think across the board, everyone has this on their agenda.
Charlie?
Great presentation, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you.
The explosion of companies that want to be listed as B Corps, are they on the right track relative to these new standards?
As in whether or not they're reporting on the stakeholder capitalism metrics?
Well, if a lot of these B Corps have been around for a long time, so I think social responsibility, social capitalism, however they call it, it's good business. They're making money. They're growing. And they've made a commitment that stakeholders are important, but also our customers, our clients, want a company that has a sense of social responsibility. So I think if we look at those companies and study how they've grown over time, we may get some answers to our questions.
Yes, there is a lot of data that that supports that doing good is good for business. Also, if you look at the implosion of ESG funds in the past year, I missed some of I'm missing some of the numbers now, but it's grown up to at least 5 times in just the last 12 months. So it's a big thing with investors as well. One story that some people have said, but wait, Lynn, not all investors. For instance, Danone, they're the first public company in France to get a B Corp certified, to be a B Corp. And the CEO was recently fired. And a lot of people said, well, he made such a big fuss about being sustainable, getting to B Corp, and they fired him. This is clearly not what all investors want, right? But my perspective on this Danone story is that he was also not able to navigate Danone during the pandemic. So in the past year, so Danone owns Evian and I'm forgetting, I think Perrier as well. So they own a couple of businesses that were hugely impacted when restaurants closed because people didn't buy as much water as much water in the past year for restaurants. And well, I think being sustainable and taking care of employees is good. You cannot just say, well, I'm going to do it to the exclusion of investors, because your investors is still a stakeholder in the business. You need to look at all stakeholders equally. And to be able to manage that, you have to be able to take care of the business from a profit perspective before you go out and create value. You cannot help others if you can't help yourself first. So that's my perspective on the Danone story.
Lynn?
Yes.
I haven't read the book, so I'm looking forward to reading it. And Charlie mentioned that Unilever is a great example. I remember when Ben and Jerry's sold the business to Unilever, that it was a big deal that, that Unilever had to prove to them that they were going to be a socially good, sustainable business. And so I'm wondering, was it the chicken or the egg? Was Unilever, did they choose Unilever because they were already doing some of this, or did they drive Unilever to do more of it? And I think you might know the answer, so I'm curious.
I am not as clear on the timeline, actually, whether the acquisition happened first or Paul Polman came in first. But Paul Polman, when he came in, he said, like, look, I'm going to slash our footprint and double our growth. And a lot of people thought, well, this guy is just crazy. And I think the stock price tanked by 10% or something like that on his first announcement. But he very cheekily said, you can't fire me. It's my first day at the job. And this is what I'm telling. This is what I'm planning to do. You either stick with me and you don't, or you don't. So some people stuck with him and some people left. And the people that stuck with him, I believe he grew the share price to, is it 200%? I will have to get back to you on these numbers. I don't have it. I don't have it with me at the moment. But at the end of his tenure, he made back that money for the investors that stuck with him for the long run, because he said, look, I'm going to slash my carbon footprint and grow the business, and it's not something that's going to happen on a quarter-to-quarter basis. In fact, he actually stopped quarterly reporting. He said, like, I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to issue profit forecasts every quarter anymore, because this is going to take a much longer time to make that impact. So he sent a very big signal on his first day at work.
That's important, because I think so many companies are so focused on that quarterly cycle, the accounting cycle, that they get so focused on the here and now, and we all know much is longer term. So good point, Lynn.
Lynn, do you think there's hope that if we have more Unilevers and companies see that, you may have a rocky start, but if you can stay the course, that you come out the winners in the end, good guys can finish first and with even better profits, that might encourage more companies to take the risk?
I think more and more companies are going towards not just because of stakeholder capitalism matrix, but because they also see the value from a bottom line perspective, that it's doing good for business is good for business, whether it's increased engagement with employees, also closer working relationship with your suppliers, as I mentioned in my presentation about Unilever working with their Vietnam supply chain in order to be more sustainable, right? It builds closer relationships. It aligns your values and your vision with your investors. It also brings your customers closer to you. They see what you stand for, and your customer lifetime value tends to be longer. You have a bigger brand equity. Yes, Charlie.
And the research says that you attract a different kind of employee that aligns with who you are, what you stand for, that will be a great ambassador for you and your mission in the world. And that creates profit. It's just 10 years ago, I don't think there was a single private equity organization that would bother looking at companies that were doing well by doing good. Now there's a whole number of them. That's all they'll invest in. And that's a change in it. We should need to pay attention to that. These are people that pray at the altar of money, and they're backing these kind of organizations. So we have to listen to that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Louise. Oh, yes. Thank you.
And when you did your research, was there anything that was a surprise to you that was different than what you were looking for, expecting?
Good question. Very good question, Lori. I was actually surprised, and this I talk a little bit more in my January presentation, at how many people who business leaders who do good, how many of them are mindful leaders. They have some sort of a meditation practice or journaling or something like that. They take time out to reflect, and that helps with clarity of purpose, aligning values with their teams in order to grow the business as well. I think particularly with social media, and we have so much inputs and stimulus in our day, I think having the time cut out, blocked out to reflect, block out the noise and to get clarity helps with balancing the different stakeholders. It's not as simple as shareholder capitalism, where it's just, I'm going to make money. It's quite clear. This is having to juggle different interests, and having a clarity of purpose and also what you stand for helps with knowing when to say no, I believe. So that surprised me, how many people meditate.
If I could I ask a question of Darren? Darren, is this what cause marketing's about?
You're on mute, Darren.
Darren, you're on mute.
One screen is easier to manage than two. Thanks for the question. Cause marketing is a component of CSR. CSR has so many initiatives and acronyms, and a lot of it is around reporting and generally the philosophy. But cause marketing is a specific component where you take a company, you learn about its story, its core competencies, and what makes it unique, and then find a cause that can be authentically aligned with that company. And you use that story to elevate the brand and to increase customer loyalty and employee satisfaction.
Thank you.
So Charlie, one of the notes you had written early on, Lynn, he had a question for you. Are you optimistic about the future?
I'm generally an optimist, yes. I am optimistic about the future. I think we're heading in the right direction. If all of us focus and just do a little bit, take a step forward a little bit every day, I think we can achieve a lot collectively. I think that's important to remember. Solving climate change is a big task, but if we all did a little bit every day on our own, collectively we can achieve a lot. So I am optimistic.
I think that raises another good point that I've been seeing a lot lately, is that you don't have to make big change to make change. If you take lots of little incremental steps, that before you know it, you will have gone farther, potentially, than if you took one giant leap for mankind.
Exactly. I think that's another thing that helps with just to go back on my previous point about mindfulness practice, because a lot of the entrepreneurs I spoke to are trying to solve big problems, whether it's one I spoke to recently, she is trying to increase diversity in tech jobs, for instance. And it's for her, it's such a big task because we're still, in spite of the knowledge, we're still so far behind. But for her, she thinks that if in 1 year I can just have even one additional person put into a good job in tech, that already is worth the effort, right? Because that's one more person than nothing. And so I think being grateful. So part of mindfulness practice, and she does this. Be practice of gratitude. What have I achieved today? And I think that helps with also understanding how much impact that you have made, and it helps social entrepreneurs take that extra step the next day, take the next step the next day.
Does anyone else have a question, a thought, a mindful imagery that we could take with us to help on those long treks when you think you're rolling that snowball up the mountain and it's a hot summer day, but if you hang in there. Thoughts?
Lynn, I just want to compliment you too on the format of your presentation. It was very simple and sharp, and the opposite of a middle school teacher. So I really appreciate that.
I'm not sure about the middle school teacher the comment, but thank you very much for that.
And of course, because
earlier I asked a question that talked about how optimistic you are. But in your contact with major corporations and big companies that have their own challenges and stuff, how do you feel that they're going to be able to address some of these issues successfully? And I specifically called out the programming issue. I mean, we had 20 programmers at my last company, and only one of them was a woman. And we went out recruiting, and there was no place to even recruit them. So I think that same type of scenario goes with the whole, parcel of different industries. I'm just kind of curious at your optimistic point of view and overcoming some of those specific obstacles that major corporations have.
Good question. I think a lot of people who are starting in this journey face, because it's looks like this really big mountain, right? And I think Leslie mentioned that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. This is going to be a long journey. I used to work for a big company. I worked at Adidas. My role was in partnerships, innovation partnerships specifically, and I was focused on. For me, it was important to partner with sustainability focused startups so that we can also grow the business in a particular direction. And it takes a long time for a ship that size to turn. It took a lot of conversations and alignments to get people but why are we going with this one? Why the other startup is much faster and all of that. I think it takes a lot of conversations to get people in that same direction. But as long as the wheel is turning in the way that you want, even if it's just an inch a day, as long as we're moving in that direction, that's better than going in reverse. So and I think we're all starting to see the benefits of moving in this direction, however slow this is. And what I tell the high school girls that I facilitate as mentoring programs, sometimes they think, well, I'm too small and I'm too young to make a difference. And I sometimes tell them, if you think you're too small, you've never spent a night with a mosquito.
Oh, I love it. Can you take it to that point? Tell us a little bit more about Activate and Darify, so we can get a fuller perspective of all the areas that you're trying to have impact in.
Of course. Thank you very much for that. Well, at the moment, it's mainly just Activate Network and the book. It's a lot of the book was a lot more work than I thought when I started on this endeavor and this adventure a year ago. Activate Network is a program I started a number of years ago to increase the number of women in technology and innovation. I started out in the, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. I was in investment banking with Wells Fargo on the tech side. My last deal was Facebook. So I was in touch with a lot of tech startups, and I didn't see enough women either in tech roles or even starting their own businesses. So I started Activate Network in order to increase the number of women into technology and in entrepreneurship. My idea was that the reason why we're not getting enough women in tech roles is because they've already censor themselves out or say like, well, this is not for me early on. And that's why I'm targeting also kids in high school.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what I do is, and this is another belief of mine, if you can see it, then you can be it. So I partner in this program. I bring the girls together with women who are working in tech. And because these are girls from disadvantaged communities, also, if possible, women who are ethnic minorities, if possible, as to the extent possible, I try and pair them up in that way. So I show the girls that it is possible to be who you want to be, whoever you want to be.
Excellent. And I think that's something for everybody that you have to start in the end in mind, good old Stephen Covey, going back to it, that see it, make it happen. And if somebody's doing it, don't be ashamed to copy it and take it to the next level.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.